How much Bitcoin do you need to be in the top 1%? How much do you need to be in the top 10% of the top 1%? How much Bitcoin do you need just to make the top 10%? Whatever your personal stacking goal is, let's go through the math, let's go through the numbers, and let's figure out how much Bitcoin you need to stack to reach the upper levels of Bitcoin wealth. So let's take off our Bitcoin glasses and our Bitcoin hats. And instead of looking at the memes, look at the numbers to figure out the real answer of what it's going to take. Now, I don't mind the Bitcoin memes, I don't mind the Bitcoin propaganda, but in my opinion, it's not the most helpful way to try to evaluate where you actually rank, where you actually stack up, if you're actually trying to figure it out. To explain the memes, before we get onto the math, these are the common ways at which people determine where they rank, right? We have animals or we have medieval lords, right? In the animal world, if you have less than a Bitcoin, you're a shrimp. You have a crab if you got between 1 to 10 Bitcoin, an octopus between 10 to 50, a fish between 50 to 100, a dolphin between 100 to 500, a shark between 500 to 1,000, a whale over 1,000 Bitcoin, and a humpback over 5,000 Bitcoin. In my opinion, this is not the most accurate way to view things. Not only because this meme is very old, from many, many years ago, back when Bitcoin was much cheaper, but also it's pretty much arbitrary. The vast majority of people are going to be way below a whole Bitcoin, and the vast majority of Bitcoin whales have way more than 1,000 coins, right? It's like trying to create an animal measuring system for just the billionaires. It's not exactly very helpful. It's so pie in the sky for most people and just arbitrary that it's not really that helpful. Similarly, with the Bitcoin feudalism rankings, you have the debt slave, Bitcoin pleb, Bitcoin soldier, Bitcoin mercenary, all the way up to Bitcoin king, starting at 21 Bitcoin at the Bitcoin king, down to 10 Bitcoin, 3, 1 to 3, half a coin to 1, quarter of a coin to half a coin, 1% of a coin to a quarter of a coin, less than a million sats, and then no Bitcoin. All right, again, sure, there's more tiers there, but if the tiers aren't based in reality, if they're not based in probabilistic outcome, I don't think it's the most helpful. So what do I think is the most helpful way to view it? Well, I think we should be viewing Bitcoin wealth distribution through a Pareto lens, through Pareto distribution lens, right? This is how all output, all activity, anything with a given number of outputs is just how the world works. 20% of the employees of a company produce 80% of the output. 20% of the companies produce 80% of the output, right? 20% of the musicians produce music that gets 80% of the views. I mean, whether you're looking at artistic output, if you're looking at economic output, if you're looking at the number of children people have, if you're looking at city populations and everything else, it's just how the world is, right? It's just the beauty of mathematics, which is, part of why I'm such a big fan of Bitcoin. And this is also true within wealth. You've probably heard me talk about this in videos before, but basically you have 80% of the population owning about 20% of the wealth, 20% of the incomes. The other 20% of the population controls about 80% of the wealth. Now, this is true in the world today. 80% of the world's adults make less than $30 a day. 20%, probably you, my dear friend watching this, are in this 20%, right? So, we're doing very well in Bitcoin because we already are very well off. Not only are we in the top fifth of income and wealth earners in the world, but that top fifth has 4 times the money than the bottom 4/5, right? And this is true in subdivisions. So of the top 20%, 80% of the wealth in that top 20% is owned by the top 20% of that top 20%. And likewise, all the way down to the bottom. I think this is true in the world today. I think there's reason to believe this is going to be true in Bitcoin as well. People wonder all the time, or they're trying to predict, where you're going to rank in your Bitcoin stacking based upon arbitrary things, looking at the news headlines, looking at the dollar-denominated amounts, looking at the Bitcoin price amount. And I think it's just much easier to assume that Bitcoin will naturally trend to where free markets trend in general, which is kind of uneven distribution. And it's not to say that the bottom 80% are, poor debt slaves and shrimp, right? That's something else I don't like about these memes. That it implies those at the very bottom are lesser than, right? Oh, if you're a debt slave and you don't have a million sats or more, then you're going to be poor, right? I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think people with very small numbers of Satoshis in the far future will have much more wealth than middle-class people today too, right? Isn't the hope of Bitcoin that we bring the bottom 80% of the world that's only making $30 a day into more prosperous, more technologically abundant, more economically thriving lives, right? I don't like this kind of mantra, this kind of worldview where, if you're at the bottom of the ranking, if you're not in the top 1%, then you're this inherent loser. I think that's a very zero-sum minded and frankly fiat-minded worldview to have. And I don't think it's the most helpful way. So again, I think we should look at things all the way up as Paretos within Paretos within Paretos, all the way up, all the way down, 80-20, all the way. So this is the math behind it, right? Now, this is just one of the attempts I have to do this, right? This video today, and there are other videos I've made with this similar kind of concept about the Pareto distribution. However, in this specific video, I have sandbagged the numbers as much as I possibly could have. We're assuming all 21 million Bitcoin are in question here. We're assuming that 8.2 billion people are going to be buying Bitcoin, right? This is forgetting the fact that billions of more people are going to be born on the planet. This is forgetting all future technological progress. This is forgetting all the AIs of the future. And again, this is assuming all 21 million Bitcoin. So, and I think that this is evidence in the math, right? For example, the top holder in this theoretical Pareto distribution network, and again, I've not interjected anything from the external world, only just an 80-20 principle all the way up, all the way down. And in this scenario, there are only 5 holders with more than 42 or 43,000 Bitcoin. There is only one holder with 687,000 Bitcoin. And we know that Satoshi has, about 50-60% more Bitcoin than that, right? So I think even this model is sandbagged to how stark the wealth distribution will be in Bitcoin. But even despite that, you'll be shocked at how little Bitcoin you need to make it to the top 1% of future Bitcoin holders. In fact, 51% of the world in this theoretical scenario has about 4,000 Satoshis. Okay, let me say it again. If you have 4,000 Satoshis, you're in the top half of the world in this theoretical future Bitcoin adopted standard. Now, obviously, am I sitting here saying that you can retire in 4,000 sats within the next, 18 months? No, obviously not. Go to the comment section down below and debate with all the other low IQ people that think that that's what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. Again, 80% of the world makes less than $30 a day. The majority of the world is poor, right? Obviously, hopefully that changes in the far future. So hopefully being in the bottom half of the world in the far future is much less problematic than being in the bottom half of the world today. However, the point still stands. I think in a long enough time horizon, assuming all 21 million Bitcoin are distributed, and assuming the top holders own less Bitcoin than they already currently do, then even in that scenario with the proper Pareto distribution, we're looking at only a few thousand Satoshis for the median person, right? Because keep in mind, this is the average number for this entire bottom half of the group, 4,000 Satoshis, okay? This means that probably the last couple rows of people, we're looking at less than 1,000 Satoshis is all the Bitcoin that they're going to be able to have, right? Now, what are we looking at this chart here? Well, there's 1,000 people shown on this diagram here, and each one of those people represents 1/1000th of the global population. Each one of these people represents 0.1% of the world. So 51.2% of the world, this is how many you get. You get 512 people in this image representing about 4.2 billion people, each on average holding about 4,000 sats. People in the upper section of the orange section have more than 4,000 sats. People in the lower half of that section have less than 4,000 sats. So if you have 4,000 sats, you're already doing better than half of the world is going to be doing a few decades from now in terms of how many Satoshis you have. Now, again, the irony here is that those people in the future, even though they have way fewer sats than you, they might have more wealth and productivity than you. Would you rather be the richest person in the world 3,000 years ago or a middle-class person today? Well, if you have a rare disease, you want to be the middle-class person today, right? So just because you have way more than 4,000 sats than these people in the future have doesn't necessarily mean they're worse off for you. In fact, they might be better off than you when it comes to maximizing productivity in their life and it comes to maximizing their time span. Now, if you have a much larger stack, 64,000 Satoshis or approximately 0.0006 Bitcoin, you are in the following 12.8% of the world, or roughly 1.05 billion people. And this is where you would stack up if you lined up 1,000 random people selected from the world, you would land somewhere in this orange stack if your Bitcoin stack is about 60 or 70,000 Satoshis. The next third of the world is by far the section of the world that has the largest amount of Bitcoin. In fact, this next section of the world is about a third of the world, 32% of the world, and they own about 7 million Bitcoin in this cohort. However, even though they as a cohort are the wealthiest cohort, they only have about 256,000 Satoshis per person in this group. That might seem completely arbitrary. Like, Luke, you're telling me that this section of the world, about a third of the world, this section has more wealth than the top 1% or the top 0.1% of the world? Yes, they do, because even though it's only 250,000 Satoshis per person, you're looking at a third of the world, which is 2.6 billion people, okay? Now, for context, this amount of 2.6 billion people is approximately double the entire current developed world, okay? And again, I think this is very optimistic. This is very bullish for the future of humanity. You combine United States, Canada, Europe, the UK, Australia, right? If you combine all the people living in the developed world, you're looking at somewhere between 1.2, 1.5 billion people, depending on what you consider to be developed. Okay, this means if you want to get ahead of the average person in developed world, maybe not necessarily in America or a super high income country, but somewhere in the mid to low section of the developed world, like again, you're already in the top 20% or so of the world, you don't need a whole Bitcoin. You don't even need 1% of Bitcoin. I think, again, in a very long time horizon, assuming the whole world adopts a Bitcoin standard, you can easily be in this upper section of the world with 250,000, 500,000, 1 million Satoshis. Now, keep in mind that 256,000 Satoshi level is an average for this entire section. The people on the upper end of the section are going to have much closer to 1 million sats, and the people on the lower end of the section are only going to have 100,000 sats or so, or maybe even a little less, 80,000, 90,000 sats. So the point is that if you're somewhere between this 100,000 to 1 million sat range, you're probably in this orange section right here. If you lined up 1,000 people in the world, you are not in this top 5% or so, but you're in the next following third behind it. So the point is, you very possibly are in the top percent of the world in terms of how many Satoshis you have, if you have a little bit more than 500,000 sats. That's crazy. And I know it sounds unbelievable. A lot of people are going to be saying I'm too bullish or I'm too bearish in the video comments below, but if you follow Pareto distribution, if you follow the 80-20 principle all the way up and all the way down, this is what you get. You're probably going to be on the lower end of the top 10% with something significantly above 256,000 sats, but not yet quite 1 million sats. Why not quite 1 million sats? Well, I'll tell you in a moment. But first, you got to subscribe. If you want to be in the top 10% of Bitcoin, the barrier to entry is actually really low. But if you want to be a top 10% supporter of my work and of my videos, all you have to do is smash the subscribe button and the like button and share this video with people in your life, right? Why? It's because about 55% of you watching these videos are not subscribed. And that makes me really sad, frankly, because it tells me you don't value the work, all the work that I put into these kinds of videos. It tells me that you don't care about promoting Bitcoin-only content to the YouTube algorithms or whatever. And ultimately, yes, it is fun to see people subscribe and join the missions and all that other things. But at the end of the day, I don't care if you subscribe or not. I've been here making videos long before anybody was watching them. I'll be here long after everybody leaves and gets bored or whatever, right? So when you're doing it, yes, you're supporting me, but more importantly, you're telling YouTube to push more Bitcoin, long-term, human-focused content and less of this day trading degenerate, buy my course, scammer type of stuff, right? Now, one way to diminish the scammers out there is to report them and get them off YouTube, but also is to give a feedback loop, a positive feedback loop to the comment, to the videos you like. So if you want to be a top 10% supporter of mine, please subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get to the fun, juicy stuff, because most of you watching probably have way more than 250,000 Satoshis. If you want to be in the next following 3.2% of the world, roughly 250 million people, you need about 1.024 million sats, or about 1% of a Bitcoin. I know, again, that number might seem really low, but that's the reality looking out here, right? Because you can only have so many people have 1 million Satoshis while also giving the bottom, 4 billion people, Satoshis, while also factoring in the pro distribution of the mega billionaires, right? So if you want to be in the next following 3% of the world, you need 1 million sats. The current fiat millionaires, there's roughly, 60, 70, 80 million fiat millionaires, depending on who you ask and what survey you take. In this section, there are about 52 to 53 million people in this section, the next 2/3% of the world. To be in this category, you need to have approximately 4.1 million sats, or just over 4% of a Bitcoin. Again, as an average, if you have more than 0.04 Bitcoin, you very probably are in the top 1% of future Bitcoin holders. Now, again, I am not saying you're in the top 1% of Bitcoin holders today, but I am saying if Bitcoin continues to have 21 million coins, and if the world population continues at only 8.2 billion people, and assuming only individuals are buying Bitcoin, forget the companies, forget the nation states, then if the whole world adopts Bitcoin, you're easily within the top 1% with only 4% of a Bitcoin, right? Because again, this entire orange section is within the top 1%. The top 10 little dudes out of this 1,000 person graphic here, you are firmly in the top 1% of future Bitcoin hodlers if you got 4% of a Bitcoin. Now, we're going to get into much more specific numbers, so we got to spread things out here. So we've taken the top 0.1%, the top dude, and we have expanded him into 1,000 subparts, right? So now this new category that we've just raised and above is an expansion of the top 0.1% of the world. In this category, we're looking at about 1/8% of the next upper tier of the world's population. This is about 10.5 million people around the planet. Okay, that's about 16 million Satoshis on average, about 0.16 Bitcoin. Now, I know that a lot of people down below that aren't subscribers, that aren't actual critical thinking people that are, typing negativity down in the comments. I know a lot of those people are going to say these numbers are way too bullish and way too optimistic. However, again, I remind you, how can you have 10.5 million people have a whole Bitcoin, right? How can you possibly do that? Right? If you're going to actually have the whole world on Bitcoin, including the upper level elites and the plebs of the developing world, of the whole world, right? If you're going to have everybody in a Bitcoin standard, you run out of coins really quick and they're going to be distributed. And so, yes, as crazy as it sounds, you're in a very, 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 very tiny section of the world with only 16 million sats, right? I'm not saying you can retire on 0.16 Bitcoin next year. I'm not one of those, hopium drug dealers. I'm a different kind of hopium drug dealer where we're talking about decades instead of years. So yes, I think with only 1/5 of a Bitcoin or 1/7 of a Bitcoin or 1/8 of a Bitcoin, something between 10 million to 20 million sats, I think within that range, you firmly are going to be in the top 0.2% of the world, because that's what we're looking at here. These first two guys, it's about 0.2% of the world, or, we're barely looking at 10 million people here in this category. This means that if you have above that average of 16 million Satoshis, and let's say you're at 0.21 Bitcoin, which is roughly 1/100 millionth of the network, if you're roughly at, which that in of itself shows you how early you are and how much of the network you actually own. So if you're at 1/3 of a Bitcoin, 1/5 of a Bitcoin, something around that range, then you can be very confident, reasonably confident, that you're going to be about in the top 0.1% of the future world, assuming the vast majority adopts Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin, like most things in a free market, follows a Pareto distribution, the 80-20 principle. So let's go to the next category, up to the next 0.02% of the world, this next level. You're looking at about 2.1 million people in this category. And the average balance of people in this section is about 65 million Satoshis, or just under 2/3 of a Bitcoin. So again, people on the upper end of the spectrum probably have close to a whole Bitcoin. People at the very bottom of the section have, maybe just about 1/3 of a Bitcoin or so. So somewhere in there is where you're going to fall if you got roughly half a Bitcoin, 0.4, 0.7, point whatever of a Bitcoin. Now, the next section is a section of people of about 400,000 folks who have, on average, 262 million Satoshis, otherwise 2.6 Bitcoin. So again, this is a subset of a subset. Already, we have had to take a diagram representing where every person represents 1/1000th of the world population, and we've had to subdivide it again to now every single one of the people in this upper section represents 1/1 millionth of the global population. And even on this expansion of the diagram, people with a quote-unquote mere 2.6 Bitcoin stack already are on the upper row of this expansion of it, right? So already it's a much, much smaller section. Now, let's go up to the next level. The next level is roughly 10 Bitcoin, 1.5 billion Satoshis, otherwise about 10.5 Bitcoin. There are only going to be about 84,000 people that fulfill this niche, or about 0.001% of the world lives in this section. So if you're in this, if you have about 8 Bitcoin, 12 Bitcoin, 15 Bitcoin, 9.7 Bitcoin, if you're somewhere in this range, these are your peers. You have a very, very, very small group of people. Sure, there are people that have way more Bitcoin than you, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of Bitcoin, but that cohort, all those cohorts combined, are only about 1/5 of the size of your peer group that has about 8 to 15 Bitcoin or so, whatever it is, right? So if you're in this group, you're part of a very elite class, and pretty much everybody else below you in the 1% has way less Bitcoin than you. And of course, the 1% has way more Bitcoin than the bottom 99%. If you're in this group, you are in the top 0.01% of the world, almost certainly, right? Technically, this group goes a little bit outside of it, but if you have more than 10 Bitcoin, then you can very confidently say that you're in this top 0.01% of the world of future holders. Now, again, we have run out of room. We need to upgrade from looking at 1 in 1,000 to 1 in a million to now 1 in a billion. Every single one of these people you see at the very top of the screen here in this third tranche, every single one of them represents 1/1 billionth of the human population, or approximately 8.2 people. If you have 42 Bitcoin, which by the way is roughly, or is exactly 1/5 millionth of the Bitcoin's network, or actually no, excuse me, 1/500,000th of the network. Pardon me, I was a little too optimistic there, right? So the point is that with 42 Bitcoin, and I know a lot of you watching this video have dozens of Bitcoin, right? Now, obviously, most of you don't. Most of you are trying to get to 1 Bitcoin, the second Bitcoin, the first Bitcoin, whatever. But many of you watching, I would dare to say, dozens, if not a couple hundred of you watching, have 10, 20, 50, 100 Bitcoin or more, right? You, my dear friends, are in this tiny, tiny, tiny cohort where every single dude in orange you see up there represents only 8.2 of you, right? Of all the people in orange in this top section, probably like 2 or 3 of those are watching this video right now. That's how small Bitcoin is. That's how early you are to Bitcoin. And this might seem like too much opium, but it's the reality of the math. You just can't simply have 1 million people owning 40 Bitcoin. That's just not possible, right? Quite literally, right? You can't have 1 million. You can't have hundreds of thousands. You can barely have 10,000 people owning 42 Bitcoin. According to my math here, it's about 16,794 people. Obviously, this is just a theoretical concept, and in my opinion, even this might be too optimistic because not all 21 million Bitcoin are going to be owned by individuals, and the global population is growing. So with 42 Bitcoin, this is the section you are in. Now, again, if you're somebody that is in any of these sections, I don't care if you have a 1% of a Bitcoin, half a Bitcoin, 5 Bitcoin, 42 Bitcoin, 100 Bitcoin, whatever the case is, feel free to book a call with me. I'm happy to help you increase your rankings on this level and increase your Bitcoin stack, right? Obviously, the fastest way to increase your net Bitcoin stack is to reduce the downside risk to your portfolio. However, also there are lots of creative ways to increase your stack. So a lot of you, I know what to do this on your own, and that is totally okay because I can't help you anyway, right? If you have a zero-sum mindset, if you want to do everything on your own, that's totally fine. I respect that because the reality is that I can't help everybody. My team can't help everybody, even though we got a team of 40 people. If we had 1,000 people reaching out every single week, there's no possible way we could keep up. So if you want to have a conversation, the reality is that my average client, we increased the Bitcoin stack by about 70% in the first year. And obviously most people reaching out are multi-deca-hole coiners, multi-hole coiners, or they have a large portion of a Bitcoin, right? These aren't people that are new to Bitcoin. But if you want to have a conversation, help increase your Bitcoin stack, your spouses, your parents, your kids, your friends, your neighbors, your businesses, whatever it is, let's have a conversation. Let's increase your stack. Information is on the screen and also in the link down below. Please only book a call if you're serious. If you're somebody that doesn't want to increase your stack, don't book a call. Don't worry, it's not for you. 99% of the people watching this video will not book a call, and that is okay. I don't need them to reach out. I am plenty busy enough. So if you're somebody that's actually serious, let's have a serious conversation. I'm more than happy to help you figure out how to increase your stack. But let's get to the very, very, very tippity top of this diagram here of this explanation. If you're a current fiat billionaire and you have the ability to buy 100 Bitcoin, 500 Bitcoin, 800 Bitcoin, without really thinking twice about it, great, congrats. You can reach this top 0.0000496% of the world, which is approximately 3,300 people, with an approximate Satoshi balance of 16.7 billion sats on average of about 168 Bitcoin. So if you have 100 Bitcoin, you're probably on the very lower end of the spectrum. If you have, let's say, 500 Bitcoin roughly, you're going to be on the upper end of this category. Obviously, now we're getting to the upper tranches of craziness here. If you got 671 Bitcoin on average as a stack, they're roughly, ironically, only about 670 people that are going to be in this category with an average balance of 67 billion Satoshis. If you're liking this video, again, please subscribe. I asked you earlier. If you didn't, please do it again so I don't have to ask you a third time. Thanks. Let's get to the final categories here. In the next 134 people, there's an average balance of about 2,600 Bitcoin. And the next category of the top few dozen elite, there are not even 30 people in this category, each with an approximate balance of 10,000 Bitcoin on average. Of course, some of them have a higher balance, like 20,000, 30,000 coins. Of course, some of them have lower, like quote unquote, only 7,000 or 8,000 Bitcoin. The second to top tier is a group of less than half a dozen people. These people, on average, have a balance of about 43,000 Bitcoin. This would be the category where Michael Saylor sits. And the final guy would be, according to the Pareto math, right? I have not injected this, but according to the Pareto distribution math, there would be approximately one person on average. Technically, it's like 1.4 people, but there is one person that would have, on average, a Bitcoin balance of approximately 65.7 billion, trillion Satoshis, 100,000, 65.7 trillion Satoshis, otherwise known as about 660,000 Bitcoin on average. So now you know where you stack, all the way from the very, very tippity top, like Satoshi Nakamoto, all the way down to the very bottom. If you want to have a conversation about increasing your Bitcoin stack, I'm more than happy to help you while I still have time and before everybody figures out that, really it's probably not a bad idea to have assistance. I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not the best guy in the world, but my team of 40 people, the Bitcoin Advisor, we've happily helped over 500 clients over the course of the last 8 or 9 years increase their Bitcoin stack on average by about 70% within the first 12 months alone. Not in dollar terms, in Bitcoin denominated terms. And that is what matters, because ultimately the future is not denominated in dollars. The future is denominated in Bitcoin. Start buying Bitcoin, hold it for the long term, book a call with me if you want to have a conversation. And remember, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.